In this presentation, I'll talk about games in education. When we look at game-based learning, it's interesting to look at what defines a game. What makes it such a great tool for learning? We can start to look at the difference between play and game. When we play something, the rules are negotiable. The goals are either unclear or there are no goals at all. The focus will be mainly on the process. There's no specific end to the game or end aim. You can improvise as you go along. When it comes to playing a game, the rules will be fixed and the goals will be clear. There will be more focus on the result. The process and the result are closely tied together. There's no room for improvisation. You will have to follow a certain path. Of course, you can experiment within the frame, but you can't suddenly come up with a new goal, for example. A good game is a mix of storytelling and rule systems. On one hand, we have the storyline that will help to stimulate the imagination and create immersion and drive. And on the other hand, we'll have the rule system as a wall you can play up against that will give you feedback and define possible action. Of course, there are purely system-based games, like for example this picture of Tetris, where you have to move some squares around and make them fit, and you get a certain amount of points. But there are not so many of these games. Now, this mix of storyline and rule system is appealing when it comes to learning, because we understand ourselves through narratives and we learn through imitation and experimentation. In the narratives, we can recognize ourselves, and throughout history, mankind has used myth, parables, and fables to pass on knowledge about human life. Good stories are often built upon a conflict or a dilemma, as are many games. In real life, we use trial and error in many situations, and in games, we also try out different solutions or tools to solve a challenge. Certain games let players simulate a role or an event and allow the players to improve their performance by observing and then imitating the in-game characters. This is also very comparable to how we learn in real life. Let's try to pinpoint some of the other things that makes game work well within a learning context. First of all, it's learning by doing. Experience-based learning is an active process based on concrete experiences, reflection, and experimentation, opposed to more passive knowledge building like reading and watching. This makes the learning stick longer because it's stored in another part of the brain. Games also creates immersion and ownership. You often play a role in a game and become immersed to that universe. And because all of your actions have an actual impact in the game, you will feel ownership. Games are multimodal, which is a good thing because they use multiple ways to communicate. They use text, sound, oral and spatial and visual language in a combination that will make the player feel more immersed and understand everything that is communicated. Games are also problem-based, and problem solving is nutrition for our brain. It encourages analytic and creative thinking, and it is full of choices to make and challenges to solve. As humans, we are drawn to problem solving. But games can also show relations between complex events that are difficult to explain. For example, how the plague spread, how environmental problems are interconnected, how cultures develop, or the many aspects that will determine the outcome of a war. But games can also do the opposite. They can zoom in on the micro perspective of an event and let us experience the everyday life of a person in medieval times. Games are like sandboxes. They're a safe place to experiment, and it's legal to fail here. And failure is an important part of the learning process as we learn from our fails. Actually, gamers fail 80% of the time they play, and they still keep on playing. But that's because they're learning to improve, they're learning to master the game. It's an important part of every learning process. Games can provide scenario competence. They makes it easier to analyze situation, make hypotheses, imagine different possible actions and their consequences. This is a skill that we can use in our everyday life. Computer players often play for hours and hours. This is because computer games are excellent in balancing between the challenge of the game and the skill of the player. So they do this through levels. That means that you will never encounter problems that are bigger than you can solve. It will always be within your reach to solve these problems or challenges. When a player is perfectly challenged, she will be in a state of flow. That means that you forget time and place and you are fully focused on the activity that you're doing. Studies of game-based learning, they show that up to 40% more effective than other media. It is, for example, when it comes to motivation to seek out and acquire more information about that topic they've learned about, but also when it comes to transferring knowledge. And lastly but not least, when it comes to remembering, games are superior in their ability to allow the user to retain the knowledge. This might be explained by looking at Ecardale's model, the cone of learning. How much we remember is dependent on the level of involvement. If we're actively engaged, we learn more. Doing the real thing is the best way to remember something. Computer games might simulate the real experience. For instance, if we try a simulation game where we have to perform an operation on a patient, we are more likely to remember it compared to if we've only been reading about it in theory. Now, there are different approaches to work with game-based learning. First of all, you can learn about the games. That means that you can treat it like a novel or a movie, and you can analyze it and look at the different genres and elements of it. You can also learn through games. This means you can take a learning game that has an actual goal for learning in it, a serious game, or you can, for example, take any commercial game and then put some learning around it, make a discussion afterwards. But you can also learn through game design. Let the students design a game about a topic that you're learning about. When they become game designers and actually learning designers at the same time, they will really have to grasp that concept and deliver the message to other students, for example. So this is also a way to use games in the learning situation. Then there's a way to use gamified learning. So this means that when you use gamification, you will take certain elements from the game. It's not a game in itself, but it will, for example, use points or feedback, challenges, collecting stuff. It could use a scenario to present a topic, or it could otherwise engage the students with elements from known from gaming, but it is not a game in itself. So it's gamified learning.